Welcome to Centennial Advisors. We use our cutting-edge technology and collaborative client-focused brokerage team to provide the highest level of professional service at all stages of our clients' investments. Our team has decades of experience in all types of markets, guiding clients through some of the most challenging times for investors. Our all-hands-on-deck approach generates more offers on your listing, and according to CoStar, we have sold our listings faster and with the highest list-to-close percentages over the past 2 years. For buyers, we identify and negotiate the best terms possible, ensuring your long-term success. We hope your time with us today helps your passive investments become massive investments. Centennial Advisors, here for you now and always.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Justin White, Managing Partner of Centennial Advisors. It is December 1st, 2022, my mom's 76th birthday today. I'm going to be joined by Jason Brooks. We're going to talk about one of our favorite subjects, which is opportunity zones. It's been a really unique year for us at Centennial, working in opportunity zones, and we've helped a lot of people protect some money, pay a little less taxes, find some really great real estate. And so for those of you that are maybe new to it or intrigued by it or want to figure out how you can take advantage of some of the great things that the opportunity zone provisions provide for investors and communities, we're going to talk a little bit about it today over 45 minutes or so. Show you some examples and hopefully get you up to speed where it can be something that you want to take the next step on and take advantage of. So as always, I'm joined by Jason Brooks of Buckhalter. Jason is one of the premier real estate attorneys across the country. And Jason, thanks for joining me again and looking forward to today.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
First thing that we'll do, if we'll go to the first slide, want to just kind of walk through, and we'll go through kind of what an opportunity zone is, and I'll have Jason talk a lot about it because he's got a lot of expertise, really kind of starting from the first days of the legislation in 2017, but show you a couple numbers of what we've done over the last year. Next one. That so far in 2022, and we've got a few more in the pipeline, we've done 8 opportunity zone transactions. I think what makes it unique, or what we're going to talk about today that's unique, is doing what we call captive opportunity zone fund investing. What we're going to show you today is a strategy where you can invest in opportunity zones, get new construction product, like what you see on the bottom there, without having to have any partners. We've invested a total of $50 million in 2022 in opportunity zone investments, where our clients have deferred over $19 million, which just that deferral of $19 million will be till in 2027. So if you wonder what that return looks like, that's close to $2 million in cash flow that our clients will make from their deferral of their tax dollars, which is one of the provisions and one of the benefits of the opportunity zone is your ability to defer the tax. For those that got into it early, they will have had, if they hold their property for 10 years, they will have close to $1 million in capital gains tax forgiven. And of these 8 properties that our clients have invested in this year, the 10 years of cash flow will total about $18 million. The 10 years of capital gains free appreciation, another $12 million. And then those that are putting debt on it and using depreciation and cost segregation and bonus depreciation will shelter an additional, or have an additional $6 million in depreciation forgiven or waived, however you want to look at it. And I'll let Jason get into the more technical terms of it. But really some exciting numbers about captive opportunity zone investment that we've been a part of in 2022 and helping our clients not only save a lot of money in taxes, but also position themselves to avoid a lot of taxes in the future. So with that, Jason, I'm going to get into it and let you introduce to everybody who's on the call that maybe doesn't know, what is an opportunity zone?
So opportunity zones are designated, we'll call them census tracts, or tracts of area that were part of the tax bill in 2016 that essentially allow people to invest in areas where you're going to put your money in for 10 years. You get tax-free appreciation on the properties, And it was really driven as a bipartisan support bill to put investments in, and I think you put it appropriately, left behind areas, or areas that had been maybe neglected or less thought about over the years. And so the goal was to drive, stimulate business and development within those areas. And, one of the things we've looked for over time are, maybe areas that were included that shouldn't have, or, areas on the outskirts of, places that are really burgeoning and developing. So that's kind of some of the benefits is, not all OZ areas, census tracts are created equally. And the goal is to find the ones that are, the strongest for investment.
Before we move on to the next slide there, Jason, it talks about the substantial improvement test. Why don't you talk a little bit about what that means and what kind of that condition is with opportunity zone investing?
So the requirement or the goal of the opportunity zone was not just to get people to buy property in the opportunity zone, but it was to invest money and grow and improve it. So the substantial improvement test essentially says that you need to acquire the land or the property with capital gain and debt, and you need to improve the property equal to the amount of the current improvements on the property with capital gains funds. So for example, if you buy a property for $1 million, the land's valued at $500,000 and the building is valued at $500,000. You need to acquire it with debt and capital gain dollar, the million, and then you need to use $500,000 of capital gains to improve $500,000 or more to improve the existing structure. Now, there's some ways that you might not have to do that work yourself, which we'll probably talk about in a little bit, but the goal is to create jobs and improving, and then create ongoing jobs as well after the building's completed.
Thank you, sir. Why don't you talk a little bit about how somebody does it? What are let's call it the mechanics of how they have to do it? For example, those of you that have done a 1031 exchange or are interested in it, usually the accommodator is something some people aren't familiar with and kind of a specialized role. Opportunity zones have a little bit of that same thing. You've got to set up what we call a qualified opportunity fund. Jason, I'll talk a little bit about that structure, how it works, and I'll turn it over to you to give everybody a little more detail.
Sure. So first you have to have a capital event, right, where you have a capital gain. And that can come from the sale of a stock, the sale of real estate, the sale of an asset. And you take that. And remember, the capital gain is just your profit. It doesn't include your basis. So if you put in $1, you sold it for $2, your gain is $1, right? And so you put that $1 into the fund. So what you need to do then from there is take your capital gain, and you don't have to take all of it out. You can take a portion or all. And we would help you set up what's called a qualified opportunity fund. You would then invest that money into the qualified opportunity fund. And then the qualified opportunity fund has a few options. It can either go out and directly buy property if it wants to buy an existing asset, or it can set up a qualified opportunity zone business, which would be for longer term development projects. You would put the money into the business, and then the business would actually develop the property on behalf of the fund.
So Jason, talk for a second, or maybe my question for everybody is that I'm sure people have seen the advertisements, the opportunities to invest in a 50-story high-rise hotel in a, opportunity zone area, and they're going to do that similar to a DST or some sort of big syndication. Is that the only way that people can invest in opportunity zones, or what are their options?
So there are a few choices. Yes, you can invest in somebody else's deal or somebody else's qualified opportunity fund where they're building a development or they're, rehabbing a building. But you can also have what I refer to as a self-directed opportunity fund, which is your own fund that goes out, and if you have enough capital, you buy your own property or properties within your own fund. You're in 100% control of your money. There are benefits to, the big funds, right? If you only have, $100,000 and you would like to participate in this, that's not enough to buy your own property, but it's enough to participate in a fund. However, you're subject to developer fees and, earnings promotes and other things within the fund. And if that developer, whoever it is, decides that at the 10-year mark, it's time to sell, it's time to sell, even if you think you should hold it for 15 or 20. Remember, these properties need to be held for a minimum of 10 years for the full benefit, but they just have to be sold by the end of 2046. So right now you could get, about 23 full years of appreciation, 10 tax-free appreciation before you have to sell it versus, a developer is probably going to be incentivized to sell it after the 10-year mark. So if you want to hold it for longer, a self-directed option works really well. And one of the benefits too, Justin, of the self-directed option, well, either option, but that I like about the self-directed option is if you happen to unfortunately pass away, the benefit passes through to your estate. So your estate could continue to hold it, or the beneficiaries of your estate could continue to hold it longer and get the benefit.
Fantastic. Next question I want to ask you is, so they're trying to incentivize people to invest in businesses and real estate to improve areas across the country. And in order to incentivize people to do that, there are some benefits. Maybe for a second, talk about originally what the 3 benefits were that investors would get by investing in opportunity zones. And then as you do that, since one of them is, let's call it expired, or at least it has not been extended yet, you can tell everybody which that is and kind of how that plays into it. So talk about the 3 benefits.
Sure. So the first benefit, the one that has expired or yet to be extended, is you got a reduction in your capital gains tax bill. So if you invested by a certain date, you got a 15% reduction. If you invested by a later date, you got a 10% reduction. That 10% reduction ended at December 31st of 2021. So you're no longer getting a reduction in your tax bill. Now, the benefits that you do get are you get fully tax exempt appreciation on the property. What does that mean? If I buy the property for $1, hold it for 10 years or 22, and I sell it for $10, I would normally pay tax on those $9 and maybe even more than those $9 if I depreciated the $1. But let's just say I pay tax on those $9. In this situation, no tax on the $9. So you just get to take all $10, put them into your bank account tax-free. The second benefit is a deferral of your federal capital gains tax payment, and in some states, your state capital gains tax payment until essentially April of 2027. It's due for your 2026 tax return. So if we think of inflation today as 8%, you put the money in now, you get another, let's call it 4 years or 4.5 years before you have to pay it at 8%. You're essentially getting a free loan for 4.5 years. And with inflation at 8%, you're potentially paying that tax bill 5 years from now with dollars that are 30 or 40% less than what they're worth today. I mean, we can hope that the inflation doesn't stay this high, which it probably won't, but that's how the math would play out.
Well, there's a lot of money just in that ability to hold it and make return on it.
Correct. Absolutely. A lot of what our clients are doing, Justin, is they're looking at potentially doing a refinance in, towards the end of 2026 if rates are good, or they're also looking at other options where, maybe they'll hold all their cash flow for 26, maybe part of 27, and use that as the tax payment, just do a distribution for tax purposes, those kind of things.
Awesome. Well, now talk to us a little bit about what types of projects qualify. And what are some of the, let's call it, conditions that somebody if they are going to go out and now they're going to start to try to find a property or work with us to find the right property, what are some of the other requirements that they're going to have to do in order to make this work?
So I think it's important to know that you have to acquire the property with the fund. So if you have already owned a property or acquired a property in an opportunity zone without the fund, you are not eligible for the benefit, unfortunately. And the problem is there's what we call the related party rule, where if you own it now and you sell it to an entity like, I'm going to sell it to my own fund, you can only own up to 20% of that fund. So that kind of can create some issues. So the first and most important thing that I would say is you need to set your fund up. You need to fund your fund with the cash. People ask all the time, you have 180 days from the realization of your capital event to fund the fund. Now, the realization of capital event has 3 different definitions by the IRS. It could be the day that you received the cash from the sale, or essentially the sale occurred. It could be the end of the calendar year, if that's when your tax year ends, or it can be the day that you receive your K1, if you got an investment K1 showing how much money you made. So those are 3 options, which can actually buy you far more than 180 days to put the money into the account. For example, if I sold a property, next year in February and I didn't get my K1 until April of the following year, you could argue that you have 180 days from getting the K1. So that's the first and most important thing. And then I would say contact your advisor and then start discussing the types of properties and the options available, because there's anything from, ground up development on your own or with others to, we'll talk about it, but like what our favorite is just in the new construction pre-C of O properties.
It's been fantastic for the people that we've helped get into it. They're really excited about not only the properties they're getting, but also the benefits of investing in the opportunity zone. Now, talk for a minute. We got a lot of people who are in the real estate business. They've maybe done a 1031 exchange or two. How do opportunity zone investments differ from 1031 exchanges?
Sure. So most people that are in real estate are comfortable and understand what a 1031 exchange is. So I sell my piece of real estate today. We'll call that the down leg. Let's say I sell it for $3. That money goes right into the 1031 accommodator's account. Of that $3, I had $2 in equity and $1 in debt. That means I have 45 days from the sale of that property to identify another property or properties to buy. I need to buy a property or properties worth at least $2 and that have at least $1 of debt on them. And so I have 45 days to identify, and then I have 180 days to close. The 45 days is inclusive in the 180-day period. For a opportunity zone deal, though, we have a completely different analysis. I sell, let's say, property A, my down leg property, and I get to take any principal basis I have left in the deal back and put it in my pocket. I don't put that in the fund. So let's say I bought the property for, same example, I bought the property for $1, and then when I sold it, I had $2 in equity and $1 in debt. I don't have to worry about the debt replacement requirement, and I get to put the first $1 back in my pocket. I'm just required to invest the $1 of profit. And so then I can invest that into my fund, and then the fund can go out and buy real estate. So in the times ahead that we see, it'd be nice to have some tax-free cash liquidity on the side, let's say the basis from your sale, and then your gains you put in the fund, and then you do the deferrals and everything else.
Thank you. So what we've gone through kind of so far is the basics of it. Program created at the end of 2017, bipartisan support to incentivize investment in both businesses and real estate in areas that, could benefit from increased investment. And following, making an investment through a qualified opportunity zone fund into these areas where you significantly improve the property, basically spend money on jobs, give people the opportunity to work in the area. If you do that, you get a bunch of tax benefits. You get to defer some of the gain, and then future gain based on appreciation and usage depreciation is not taxed, is opportunity zones in a nutshell. As Jason said, there's a variety of ways you can do it. You can do it through a big fund and ride in the passenger seat, or you can control your destiny a little bit more through a captive opportunity zone fund. Jason and I have had the good fortune to do a lot of work in a unique space of this. As he's said a couple times, we do a lot of captive fund investment in the properties we're going to show you are typically new construction. Most of the ones we've done have been double net lease, large national credit tenants, but you have the ability to buy storage facilities, multifamily, whatever product you're interested in. Acquiring pre-C of O properties allows you to get the benefits of significant improvement. And we'll go into a little more detail on how you make that work right now. So Jason, we're going to start with, so if I'm interested in the idea of owning a Chipotle on a double net lease that's brand new construction with a national credit tenant that's going to provide me some returns, sounds great. But how do I make it work with an opportunity zone? Because that sounds too good to be true. Let's start walking people through the process of how we go about doing that. So talk a little bit about original use and what that looks like and what somebody has to do.
Right. So when we talked about earlier that you had to improve the property equal to the amount of the current improvements, the way that it's defined in the code is that you need to essentially go in and do work and create an original use with a new value. What the IRS is allowing people to do is if someone is building a project and they are developing it, you can actually, if you are a non-developer, buy the property from them before it gets its certificate of occupancy, which is its original use. It's how it's defined. You can actually buy that property pre the certificate of occupancy issuance and get credit for all the improvements done by the developer that you're buying the property for. For example, you go in and somebody has bought a piece of dirt and they're building a 7-Eleven gas station car wash in North Carolina. And what we will do is go in and we'll say, okay, this property looks like it's going to be completed in 2 months. It's going to get its certificate of occupancy. So we can go in and the advisors at Centennial will negotiate a purchase agreement, or an LOI. We'll help them with the purchase agreement. We put it in contract. And all we do is we make sure that we close on the transaction a few weeks before the issuance of the certificate of occupancy so that you are the owner at the time of the original use. Now, we do things to protect you in this process with construction holdbacks or performance guarantees so that you're in a place where you're not going to get stiffed, where the deal just doesn't get completed and taken to the end. But this is the benefit of working with an experienced advisor on this and having them, at Centennial find you the right deal. And we actually even renegotiate leases as necessary to take them from, let's say, a triple net, which is not allowed under the OZ regulations, into a double net transaction.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second and talk about placed in service. The couple comments I'll make on this is that, that all of this is, I guess, codified in the IRS code about how they look at place in service date. And for the reasons of which that they've decided to do it, the certificate of occupancy is when you're effectively the basis of your property changes. And so if the basis of the property changes after somebody has owned the property, they get all the credit for the change in the basis. And so that's how it kind of works within the IRS guidelines and code. And in fact, in 2020 and 2021, after opportunity zones had been around for a little bit and we started to work in this space and done a couple deals, the IRS came out with additional guidelines. And one of the additional guidelines that they spoke of specifically was somebody's ability to buy a pre-construction or pre-C of O building and it qualify for opportunity zones. And so not only does it match up with the code, but also the guidance that the IRS has given after the opportunity zones is that it still fits and it works exactly for what they're trying to do, which is get investment into these neighborhoods. So Jason, talk a little bit more about placed in service, what that looks like. Our next slide's got a couple terms that most people may not be familiar with, but I know you've explained it to a number of CPAs, tax attorneys, and very, very high net worth individuals that have already worked with us on this stuff. And once you've gone through it, they've got a handle on it and they've got a comfort level of how this works.
Sure, absolutely. And I think one of the important things to know too, Justin, why the certificate of occupancy is so important is if you're doing a substantial amount of work, right? The substantial improvements, you should be pulling permits, right? Because you're likely touching structural systems. There's major work being done. When you pull those permits and they're completed, you do get a certificate of occupancy that for the new work. So I think that's why that's kind of like the rubber stamp that if you do it before that, the improvements are done, you get credit for it. But the placed into service is the big portion that the IRS is looking at. So, right, when the building is actually ready to be used, occupied and serviced by a tenant. So, when the utilities aren't turned on, when, they haven't passed all their inspection tests, the property is not ready to be placed into service and be occupied for its initial use. So that's why we want to close before that date, because then, as Justin explained, the IRS gives us credit for the improvements. And so one of the things we look for is, we've actually had deals where we're, trying to ask the developer, please, give us 2 weeks, we're going to close, and then you can do your final inspections, giving them, working with their lawyer so that they know to tell the teams, don't start your last inspections, because oftentimes it starts a process. And once that process starts, you don't want to be accidentally issuing a C of O, 3 days before we close, because that would be, create real problems for the fund.
Thank you. You had mentioned it before, and you kind of said it in passing. You were talking about changing the leases and renegotiating leases. And I think I would say it's been not, not surprising, but how most of the tenants, and these are large national credit, even in some cases publicly traded tenants, have worked with us to change leases to make it mutually beneficial for all the parties. So if you can't have a triple net lease, and that's the easy, take it to the bank, but explain for a second why that doesn't qualify for an opportunity zone. And talk a little bit about why it needs to be changed to a double net or single net or whatever it may be. Talk a little bit about lease structure and how that relates to opportunity zones.
Sure, absolutely. So the goal of the opportunity zones was not to just create jobs in the improvement of the properties, but it was to create ongoing and lasting jobs. And besides the jobs created within the property that's built, let's say the people working at the fast food location or the gas station, or even if you built an office building, the jobs within, the goal is to continue to create additional jobs through building maintenance or something associated with the operation of the property. Therefore, the code specifically outlaws what we would call pure triple net leases, where you are just a fully passive landlord and you do nothing but collect your rent check. So what we've actually, I was on a call today with the counsel for a deal that Justin and I are doing for a client, a 7-Eleven in Oklahoma. And I said, we need to make this a double net lease. And he was like, I'm sure the tenant would be more than happy to take on less responsibility than they were originally obligated to have. And I was like, this is the lease we did on another 7-Eleven. This is how we modified it. It's already been approved by their legal, and everybody was really happy. And to his point, we're making the tenant take on a smaller amount of responsibility, and we are taking on a larger amount of responsibility so that we meet the opportunity zone requirements. Now, we are selective in which responsibilities we'd like to take on, because again, we'd still like a minimum amount of work for our clients, but we're actually able to shift the leases around so that it meets everybody's needs.
Can you tell us, in some of these transactions you've done, how the structure has changed from triple net to a more management or more landlord responsibility, ability to create jobs lease structure?
Sure. So you can take on different responsibilities within the maintenance, right, is the easiest one. And so in certain situations, we take on, roof repair and maintenance, for example, right? Or, that's the item on the structure we're going to be responsible for. We could take on, a landscaping requirement where we're going to be managing the landscaping, but, we can change the lease around to charge additional rent for landscaping costs. It's just our responsibility to make sure that, we're spending some dollars on landscaping. And so for the roofs, for example, are something I like, because most roofs these days on commercial properties come with a 15 to 20 year warranty. Most of our clients aren't going to be owning the property at the 15 or 20 year mark. And so from our perspective, it seems to be one where, if there's a problem, we can call the warranty company, but we're still taking responsibility and ownership for it.
Talk a little bit about, we got a client who took over the landscape because it's a two businesses next to each other, shared parking lot, et cetera, took on the management of the landscaping, et cetera, and then was able to charge a management fee to both of the tenants. So it ends up making a little bit more money.
So yeah, actually, I think the first pre-C of O deals we ever did was for this client, and we bought a property and two side by side were attached, and he was like, man, our one item that we're responsible for is landscaping, but he had to what we built into the lease that he would submit the landscaping invoices back. So for his time and for the services of managing and making sure the landscape was taken care of, he put on a 15% management fee on top of the landscaping cost to compensate himself for his time. So he makes a few extra dollars for the work.
So you talked about roof. We might get a question. What about, that would seem to be like a really expensive thing to take on. You mentioned it a second ago, but talk a little bit more about why you like roofing structure on these new construction properties.
Yeah, absolutely. So roof is my favorite thing because, like I said, most roofs today on commercial properties come with 15 to 20 year warranties by the initial roof installer. So if we do run into an issue, if we have a problem, what we can actually do is call that roof installer and we go back to them and say, there's damage here, and they actually send someone out to fix it. The difference between, the amount of work and management we're actually taking on isn't really a cost related item. It's we have to deal with the roofing company versus the tenant dealing with the roofing company. But I actually like that better because most of the time what's going to happen is the roofing company is going to get a call from the tenant. They're going to say, you're not the owner. The tenant's going to call us and we're going to have to call the roofing company anyways. So it's probably the same amount of work we would have to do regardless.
I think the other nice part about roof is that to make sure that you're meeting the active management portion of it, you can schedule a regular 6-month, 12-month kind of inspection, check on it, give us some feedback, do some preventive maintenance stuff that is not a big cost item, but definitely shows active management of the property to make sure that you're meeting the opportunity zone requirement.
Absolutely. And to that point, Justin, if you're inspecting it regularly, you're probably going to end up preventing a larger issue from happening if it were, and that might cause downtime at the store or the facility, which then ends up costing you rent based on the lease. So that active management will probably save you money down the road.
Awesome. We're going to the next slide before we get into, you had mentioned it earlier, proposed updates and changes, and then kind of a simple formula of how to invest is just kind of the benefits we've talked about so far. Jason's covered a number of these, but actually, Jason, why don't you talk about the flexibility to move investment dollars and the ability to take distributions, because we haven't really covered those yet as the benefits of opportunity zone investing.
Right. So there's a couple different things you can do within the opportunity zone investment. So we've talked about, if you're developing a property, you would set up a qualified opportunity zone business where you drop the funds down into the business. So if you're going to take 2 years to develop or to entitle and permit a property, you can actually have that money in that qualified opportunity zone business being invested in other opportunities as long as it's part of your created business plan. Additionally, your money doesn't have to go into one transaction or one property. You can spread it out into multiple. We're doing at least 4 deals this year for one client that just sold a business. Justin probably knows better than I do, but we'll probably end up doing 2 or 3 next year for the same client as well. So you're not stuck into a single fund or into a single property. And one of the other things you can do too is oftentimes, now we found a lender that if they get comfortable with the buyer or sponsor, will fund a loan pre-certificate of occupancy. So hopefully we have that new program available. But oftentimes pre-C of O, you have to buy all cash. So if you buy all cash and then after you get the C of O, you put a loan on it, you can cycle that money back into your fund and go buy another property, right? So if you, let's say, can get 50% loan to value, you can take that 50% of the money you just got back from the loan and put it into a new transaction, which allows you to end up buying more property and own more assets.
Hey, Jason, clarify for a second, because we keep talking about property and you got to hold it and own it for 10 years. Be more specific. Do you have to own the same property for 10 years, or does my money have to stay in the opportunity zone fund, and the opportunity zone fund has to be investing in property or business for 10 years?
The latter. So you have to have your money in the fund for 10 years, and the fund needs to be investing your money for 10 years. Now, if you're buying property, you could buy a property today in the fund. You could develop it, build it, and sell it, and leave the money in the fund and buy another property. Now, the whole caveat to that is you need to buy your last property by December 31st of 2026. But you could trade a few times within the next, call it 4 years, where you cycle through a few different properties. If you go in and buy something, do a big value add improvement, you find a buyer that's really going to give you value and credit for that, you just increase the amount of money in the fund, and then you can go out and buy a few more assets. So that is really the benefit of this of moving, or I would say cycling the funds through through multiple deals.
All right, and then talk about the ability to take distributions. We have one client who, whether it's distributions or management fees, wants to know how they're kind of able to tap into some of these dollars that they've put into the opportunities of investment.
So you can take from the day that you acquire the property, you can take cash flow rents from the property and distribute them to the investors. So if I buy the property today and Justin and I own it together and we get a $20,000 rent check, we can distribute the rent out from that rent check. Also, we can set up a management company if we want to manage the fund, and that management company could also receive management fees from those dollars as well. Now, On the distribution side, the only thing you cannot do for the first 2 years of ownership is if you buy a property today, you have to hold it for 2 years before you can do a cash out refinance. So if you refinance within the first 2 years of buying the property, those dollars need to stay within the fund. And you have an asset test every 6 months. And what that asset test does is make sure that over 90% of your assets are invested into a qualified opportunity zone. Now, that doesn't count. Cash is not considered being invested in the qualified opportunity zone unless it's in a qualified opportunity zone business with a valid business plan. So if you do a cash out refi and you're like, I'm just going to hold the money for 2 years and then distribute it to myself, that doesn't work either. So you'd have to reinvest it back into the funds or back into a property so you don't fail the test. Now, after 2 years, Justin and I could do a cash out refinance if we bought it all cash and take the refinance proceeds and distribute them to ourselves tax-free and move on. So.
All right. Jason, talk next a little bit about what are the proposed changes. So again, originally put together as part of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act in late 2017. Now, 5 years into the Opportunity Zone program, there's been some discussion about refining and some changes. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of the changes and maybe, at least as it relates to the top one in green, census tracts, why there is a need to change and what the opportunity might be today before changes get made?
So I think the census tract one is the big part, right? So the change that they would really like to make is there were, let's call it probably, there's, I think, 860 approximate opportunity zones. There's probably 40 or 50 that at least that don't belong. And you can look them all up, but there's, really good parts of Virginia. There's Justin and I have a client that owns a few properties in Hawaii on like one of the most expensive golf courses that's in an opportunity zone. There's some great ones in Los Angeles that are located mid-city LA, Culver City area. There are just a bunch of different opportunities. I mean, I would argue San Pedro needed the investment, but how often do you get prime Southern California waterfront property in an opportunity zone? So it's really about trying to fix the ones that shouldn't have been included and then potentially add in new ones that they really want to stimulate investment in. And so that's the census tract changes. They're also talking about extending the reduction in the OZ taxes, or in the capital gains taxes. So the 10% that people were receiving up until the end of last year, that might come back into play, as well as extending the date when your money is due on your tax payment past, let's call it April 15th of 2027. In extending that date, they would also be then extending the length of the opportunity zone availability past December 31st of 2026.
Fantastic. So in short, how do you go about doing this if you're really interested?
Well, first you have to have your capital event. And then once you have your, what?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, first you have your capital event, right? So you sell a bunch of stock and make a bunch of money. You sell an expensive art piece you bought for inexpensive. You sell a piece of real estate and you decide, I want to invest in an opportunity zone fund. The next step is you're going to give, us or another law firm a call to set up your fund. And you're going to give the advisors at Centennial a call to help you identify and buy properties. Now, one of the things that I will say that, I know Centennial has, and unfortunately we work with a bunch of brokerages, but Centennial has people dedicated specifically to finding these types of transactions because we do
on step 2.
We do such a high volume of these transactions. I would say Centennial has team members solely for finding those kind of deals. So their inventory and knowledge of these is much greater than most of the others.
Okay, we got to keep going fast because he's going to get ahead of us. Now you're going to slow down. So step 3, you got to acquire a pre-certificate of occupancy.
Well, you guys are going to help us find the property. So tell us about what you guys are doing to find the property, and then we can talk about the acquisition side.
So there's a big part of, there's a lot of properties that come on the market, most of the time not in opportunity zones, but I would say frequently they come on the market in opportunity zones and people don't know the benefit, or they don't understand that it's even in an opportunity zone and what it means. So a lot of times for people that are familiar with the net lease market, The desire of a net lease sale is to wait till certificate of occupancy, then get the property on the market when it's just been finished. Well, as a part of their marketing, they usually get the property on the market, let's call it 30, 45 days before that certificate of occupancy. And that's what we look for, is properties that are under construction in opportunity zones. And as Jason mentioned, in good opportunity zones. We're going to show you a property later, a Caliber Collision Center in West Lafayette, Indiana, on a major street, maybe a mile and a half from Purdue, surrounded by some nice housing, some good multifamily housing on a street with all of the major national retailers. That is a good location, and a really good location for a business like Caliber. So you, not only is our client going to get the opportunity zone benefit, but they're investing in an area that matches up really well with what Caliber targets with their demographics. So we go out, and as Jason said, we negotiate these transactions to close before certificate of occupancy. As it says, what does readiness mean? The property has to be ready and capable to perform its function. If you acquire the property before it is able to do that, as soon as it is able to do that, you get all the benefit of the dollars invested to get it to that point. So we buy pre-certificate of occupancy property. The next thing Jason will talk about is how somebody goes about maybe getting additional depreciation to shelter their cash flow and get an additional tax benefit of the opportunity zones. Jason, talk a little bit about what somebody might do from the self-financing side if they're acquiring a property pre-certificate of occupancy and there isn't a lender out there that will finance their asset until there is the certificate of occupancy.
Sure, absolutely. And one thing to point out too, Justin, I think a bunch of the really good opportunity zone deals we've gotten for clients is because your team is in the market and people know we're buying these OZ deals. And so we've bought in one deal, and then the broker will call us right after we close and say, our client is building these 3 other properties, same style, same tenant, same everything, in these locations that also meet it. Do you have additional clients? And we're finding out about these deals, or you guys are, and our clients are, months before they ever hit the market, because they know we've executed on them. They know we know how to do it. And now they want to bring them to, the Centennial team to help sell. So I think that's a major benefit from looking at it like an inventory standpoint. But on the depreciation is a really interesting part, or I would say one of the biggest benefits of the opportunity zone that we didn't discuss in the initial, let's call it 3 benefits of the OZ. So because there's no tax paid on the appreciation of the property, there's no depreciation recapture. So if you depreciate the property, let's say, down to 0 normally, if I buy it for $1 and I depreciate it to 0 and I sell the property for, $2, I pay tax on the $2, not on the $1 of what would be deemed originally profit, because the depreciation is a tax loss I've used over time. Well, because there's no tax paid on the gain from an opportunity zone transaction, the depreciation becomes more valuable. And so what we do to create depreciation is you need to put debt on the property. Now, there's a few different ways to put debt on. You can use conventional lenders, or you can make a loan to yourself, and we will fully paper and document that loan. But that loan allows you to create depreciation through additional basis to the fund. So, for example, I buy a property for $4 million. I don't have a lender because it's pre-certificate of occupancy. I can actually lend myself $2 million, and my fund can put down $2 million. But maybe I have the $4 million gain, but I haven't put all $4 million into the fund yet. So I can lend myself $2 million. I can put $2 million down. I can buy the property. I get my C of O shortly after that. I refinance and put the traditional debt on. I get my $2 million back. And then I can use that $2 million to buy an additional property. So that depreciation now becomes something that isn't going to be recaptured. And even if you self-finance, you can pay that loan back at an expedited rate so that, your money isn't out as long. And then one last thing to point out is there are a few types of properties eligible for what is called bonus depreciation. That bonus depreciation means that you can accelerate the depreciation through cost segregation all into year 1 if you close before the end of this year. Next year, you can accelerate 80% of the depreciation into the first year. So we have clients that are buying bonus depreciation properties and accelerating the depreciation and getting more depreciation than the amount of equity they're ultimately putting in when we're all said and done.
All right. We're 45 minutes into this. I promised you 10 minutes to talk about ULA. So I want to do a couple things first. Up on the screen right now, you have some of our recent opportunities on closing. What I'd really like to highlight here is, A, they're all across the country. We've put our eyes on every one of these assets. And while we're buying not only the tenant and the lease, and our clients are buying the tax benefits, at the end of the day, it is still a real estate deal and location matters. So you can see all these properties across the country. Quickly want to highlight, so who are our clients getting when they buy these? In the top left in the Reno Tahoe, that is CMC, which is a large metal fabricating company. And that property is located in the Tahoe Sparks Industrial Complex, which will be the largest industrial park in the world. By the time it's completed, it's home to the Gigafactory. Walmart's got 1 million square feet, maybe 2 million. Huge players all around it. Great location. The Chipotle, and you'll see we've got Chipotle in Roanoke. We've got Chipotle in Delano, California. Both of those 10+ year leases, corporate backed. All Chipotles are corporate backed. The one in California is phenomenal location right off the freeway next to In-N-Out, in part of a Home Depot center with Walmart across the street. What I would say is probably for a 20-mile radius, the main intersection of retail and commerce in the Central Valley around the property. In Roanoke, beautiful property near a bunch of industrial, high quality industrial, more science and tech, and a good location there right off the highway. In Indiana, the Burger King tenant is a 900 tenant or 900 plus location tenant. I'm probably not doing them justice. Carroll's Corp, one of the largest franchisees in the world when it comes to operating fast food. The property is literally right outside the gate of a university. And then we've got the Whitewater Express in Cleveland, Texas, which is a northern suburb of Houston, on the, not the interstate, but the highway that leads to a beautiful high school and some very, very high-end residential. And then I'll finish with the Oklahoma City 7-Eleven. We've got one 7-Eleven in Burlington, North Carolina, that'll be completed soon. And then the Oklahoma City 7-Eleven, both corporate-backed 7-Eleven properties, 15-year leases, beautiful, beautiful stores. The Oklahoma City property is walking distance to the governor's mansion. So as Jason mentioned, some of these opportunity zone areas and census tracts are a combination of a great spot for improvement, but also a pretty good spot to begin with. So those are just some of our recent closings and some of the tenants that are included. We'll show you real quick, just as if you ask and go, well, I don't necessarily want an industrial property. I want something with more upside. Why don't you go to freeze and or one of our listings, which is 2 or 3 slides in. Go back to perfect. This one here. This is a $13 million 39 unit multifamily development in Southern California in Wilmington, which Jason had just talked about how he thought it was incredible that San Pedro could be in a opportunity zone. This is a neighborhood right next door. For those of you that aren't familiar with Wilmington, this is going to be brand new 2023 construction. When it's delivered, an opportunity zone investor can come in and acquire this before certificate of occupancy, get all the benefits of the opportunity zone, and get themselves a multifamily property that typically has a little bit faster rent growth and provides more opportunity for appreciation. Obviously, a little bit more management intensive property, but one that provides a little bit higher return. So if you're looking for more return, it can be done through multifamily or self-storage. If you're looking for super ease and virtually mailbox money with a little bit of effort, we've sold a lot of those net lease properties as well. Jason, couple questions before we move on.
Sure.
Can an OZ fund save a failed 1031 exchange?
Yes, absolutely. So We've actually done a handful of deals where individuals were unable to identify a property they liked in their 45-day window.
You haven't done that with us, though.
No.
Okay,
Not the failed 45-day ID, but you and I were talking about this before. We could even do this for someone that missed, let's say they ID'd, they went into contract, they decided to walk. We could, and they just decided what's called break your exchange. They could break their exchange and we could still do this as a way to help them down the road.
But you've never had to do that with a Centennial client in an exchange, correct?
No, because you guys have always delivered.
Thank you. That one question you mentioned before, just kind of in passing, that there were states that allowed you the opportunity zone deferral and there are other states that don't. How does that happen? And what are some of the states that don't?
So states have the ability, but not the requirement to recognize all or parts of the federal tax code or have their own tax code. So for example, the state of California recognizes roughly one line of the federal tax code, and they wrote their complete own tax code. So they don't recognize the capital gains portion. So if you have a capital gain event in California now, you pay your tax in California the following year. So if you had a sale now in California, you pay your California tax next year. You only get the federal deferral. There are many states though that recognize capital gain, and within that capital gain, you're able to get the benefit, both state and federal, on the deferral.
Thank you, sir. Before we transition to talking a little bit about ULA, which is was a measure passed in LA a couple weeks ago, want to open it up. If you'd like to ask a question, and we've been remiss today, you can just do it in the chat. Go to the chat, type your question in, and we'll get to it, and we'll answer a couple of your opportunity zone questions. But as we start to maybe transition, Jason, let's talk a little bit about Measure ULA, what it is, and let's start with what is it and what is the proposed intention of it, and then we can talk a little bit about the impacts and best things somebody can do to try to mitigate what could be a significant financial, impact of the legislation.
Sure. So ULA is a new tax that was on the ballot in the city of Los Angeles during this last election, and it is a real estate sales tax. They called it the mansion tax, but what they didn't disclose is that it affects more than just residential. It also affects commercial properties, and all of the funds are supposed to go towards creating homeless housing. So it's a tax on properties. So if your property sells for between $5 million and $9,999,999.99, you pay 4% tax. If it sells for 10 million or more, your tax is 5.5%. It's important to note that tax is paid even if you're doing a 1031 exchange. That tax is paid regardless of if you're making a profit. That tax is paid on every sale of every commercial and residential property in those price points. So if you think about closing costs for a transaction, right? Let's say the commission is 5%, just because that could be a blend of commercial or residential. LA County has a $1.10 or $1.20 recording tax. I think LA City is $4, I think, something around there. So you're looking at about a 5.5% recording tax, City of LA. You have a 5% commission normally. So your cost plus, let's say, regular closing costs, escrow, title, another 1%. You're looking at, somewhere between 11 and 12, 10.5 to 11.5%. You add now a 5.5% tax on top of that. You're potentially looking at total transaction costs of upward of 17+% just to go through. Now, there is a window of opportunity. If you are someone thinking about selling your property in the city of Los Angeles, there is a window of opportunity between now and April 1st of next year where you do not have to pay that tax, because the tax goes into effect April 1st, any escrow closing after April 1st of 2023. So keep that in mind. If you were on the fence about selling your property and you're like, is now the time? I might not have gotten as much as 6 months ago, but do I want to wait another 6 months? Well, 6 months from now, your property would have needed to increase by, north of, let's call it 6 or 7% potentially, in order for you to end up exactly where you are today.
Go back for a second. Somebody's got to be wondering this. They can change my property tax. I thought that was like Prop 13.
It's not a property tax. It is a sales tax. It is like your documentary transfer tax on your deed. It is a sales tax. It does not affect your annual property tax basis. It is just a new sales tax. So when they raise the sales tax on your, gas or, the groceries you buy at the store, they just voted to raise a different tax. Well, actually, technically they created a new tax, but.
All right. So we're trying to pull up your fact sheet from the other day. We thought we had it. So
there's a really good question, Justin, while you're pulling that
Yes.
up. It says ULA does not consider equity in the property. No, ULA does not consider equity. Again, it doesn't consider if you're making a profit, if you're losing money. It doesn't consider anything. It is a brand new tax, and everybody pays it. So.
And so what do you think are people's options? What do you think the right thing to do is? What suggestions do you have? Share some more.
So I think it's worth considering. Like I said, if you've been thinking about selling a property, if you're on the fence to sell a property, I would call your advisor today and sit down and talk with them about how this tax might affect your sale. You and I talked a little bit about before the webinar today about, will it affect the buyer's mindset? And I was like, it doesn't really affect buyers' mindsets, right? Because in California, buyers don't pay transfer taxes, the sellers do. Buyers aren't paying commissions, the sellers are, right? They might think about how does it affect them when they exit the property down the road, but they'll probably start building that into their underwriting costs towards their exit. I think if you're a seller, now's a great time. And even if you're under the 5 million mark, but you're getting close, and you're like, oh, I'm just going to sell in a couple years, and now you're above the 5 million mark, that's an extra tax you're going to have to pay. You can probably net close to the same number today if you're near the 5 million mark as you will in a couple of years, and then buy something different as well. So it's really for people that have been thinking about considering selling, and you're in the city of LA. Now's a chance to potentially save yourself 4 or 5.5%.
Yeah, Adele asked the question, well, who will sell them? And my answer would be, it's probably, for some people, it might just be the final straw about owning in LA, because the reality is, in a lot of cases, you can make more money in other places. We've seen a lot of people move money to Orange County and other, let's call it, redder cities and counties throughout Southern California, where you get the benefits of Southern California, but you don't get some of the big city things in LA. I also think, Adele, the other reality of the situation is that you're gonna pay it, whether you sell today, whether you pass it to your kids. Somebody's gonna pay it at some point going forward after April 1st. The reality is it's probably not going to get smaller 10 or 20 years from now. In reality, that percentage might go up. The number probably changes. As I had said to Jason when we were talking today, I really think the sharpest move for investors is if you own a property somewhere between $3.5 and $5 million that it's worth it right now, is to sell now before your property is worth 5 million plus, and the buyer wants you, basically a $400,000 price reduction because they're going to have to pay the tax or whatever it may be. But you do it now, you get out of some of the things that people don't like about LA, whether it's on the commercial side or the multifamily side, and redeploy your equity into something that you're never going to have to worry about that. The example I would give a lot of people is, to me, it's a lot like soft story retrofit for those of you that own multifamily in the teens. When that passed in 2015, I want to say, or 2012, you could sell a building without doing the retrofit, and the buyer would pay the price and kick the can down the road. Well, once we got about 12 months out, every seller was having to pay for it, either do the work or give a credit. right now, if your property's under the threshold, you probably can sell it, kick the can down the road with somebody else, and redeploy your money into Culver City, or Calabasas, or Torrance, or Downey, or Tustin, wherever it may be, and avoid that problem altogether. So I do agree with Jason. I think this ULA thing is going to have a big impact. It is going to make some people sit on the sidelines, but the reality is they're going to have to pay it at some point, because the only reason you should own in LA right now is that you think property is going to be worth more in 10 years than you think it's going to be worth today. If you think it's going to be less, you should already sell. But it's going to be a costly thing.
Justin, think about it. If, not everybody in the situation on our Zoom has this situation, but if your property's worth $10 million, it's $550,000. If your property's worth $20 million, that's $1.1 million. It's a lot of money that you're potentially giving up in this situation like this, and every dollar counts. And, sure, it's a cost, so you're not responsible for replacement on the exchange side. But, for some people, that 5.5% could be a substantial portion of their profit at this point.
The next question, and I love them all. Could you do a ballot initiative to repeal this? Probably. You could. What's your likelihood in Los Angeles of doing that?
Really low. It was just on the ballot and it passed. It was a voted on item. Unfortunately, people voted to have it pass. It's, once government isn't usually in the place of giving things back, right? Once, things happen. So I think it's unlikely.
Well, and, I think it's one of those things that got through without a lot of probably publicity, that now, to the points of this conversation, it's prohibitive, and it's prohibitive from investment. And, unfortunately, I think a lot of the things we're experiencing in LA and in some respects all of California is it's not as attractive for investment. And that's changing some of the metrics and some of the numbers and making it's reason why probably, we all have a couple friends that have moved. It's why we all have at least one or two people that had to move because their company moved. And it's why in my 25 years of doing this, more people have started to move their equity out of California than I've ever seen before, because they think that there are better opportunities in Texas or Tennessee or Colorado Springs or any of these other places that have, younger demographics, more businesses going to. They're different investment opportunities than maybe they were 10 or 15 years ago. Jason, any last comments before we get out of here? We try to keep everybody to an hour, and you were right. We should have spent more time on this one.
No, I think that there's a great opportunity in opportunity zones. We've been saying that for a while. A lot of our very intelligent clients are taking advantage of it from a tax perspective, from a depreciation perspective, from just buying quality assets with no tax at the end. And then for the ULA matter, really give an advisor a call, sit down, see how it affects you, your property, and what opportunities might be available.
Adele, give us a call. Give me a call. We've, in your exact situation right now, we have two clients that worked with somebody else that couldn't find what they were looking for out of state to satisfy an exchange. We're licensed in a ton of states. We got relationships across the country. And if you'd like some help, give us a call, reach out to me, reach out to the advisor that invited you to be a part of this. And we'd be happy to try to help you out. I'm sure we can do it. Jason, as always, thanks for your time. It was a lot of fun. For those of you that joined us, thank you very much. We enjoy putting these things together. We enjoy sharing what we know and what we're seeing in the marketplace. And hope you have a great evening and a great holiday. Thank you.